Welcome. I'm Pamela Riccia from livingjoyfully.ca, and today I'm here with Daniela Bramwell. Hi, Daniela.
Hi, Pam.
Hi.
So nice to see you.
It's so nice to see you too. We have gotten to know each other over the last few months in the network, and I'm really excited to hear more about your unschooling journey. So to get us started, can you share with us a bit about you and your family and what everybody's interested in right now?
Okay. There's 3 of us and 1 cat. Marco is my spouse, and Emma is our daughter. She's 4 and a half. And I guess we're a Canadian Ecuadorian family. I mostly grew up here in Ecuador, but my whole family's in Canada, and Marco is Ecuadorian, and Emma's kind of been in both places, lived in both places. Emma is really into everything kind of like animated animals and things, so like cars with eyes, but mostly plush toys, so like anything with eyes and that talks that are things or animals, but mostly animals and plush toys. She loves them, and spends hours, mostly with us. We spend hours every day playing all kinds of imaginary games involving all kinds of mostly plush toys, but sometimes little figurines. And she also loves kind of watching videos, so like, I don't know, Minnie Mouse, or she loves Doc McStuffins that has all the animated toys. She loves kind of iPad games that have like animated animals in it, and she loves drawing. She spends usually at least an hour a day, I'd say, sometimes even 4. It's just amazing. She really loves drawing, and she draws out all of these stories and scenes that she tells us with the animated animals. I'm just amazed by her drawings because it's completely uninhibited. She'll just go, she just thinks about what she wants to draw and she just draws it. There's no, oh, this is wrong, I'm gonna erase it. Or no, she just kind of draws, and she draws amazing movement. Like, she'll draw animals falling or flying or sleeping or sitting or crouched down or running, and there's so much movement and expressions in their faces. It's quite amazing to us. And she tells us the story of what they are, and her drawings are inspired by all kinds of things, I guess, like the things that she likes to watch, or iPad games, a lot of books also, so she likes like the animated characters in books, a lot of real life stories. Even one time there was a sticker that we found on an old toy of a kind of like an animated skeleton, and that inspired months of drawing animated skeletons. She also likes, so she loves plush toys, and then sometimes she wants one that we don't have, or we haven't found to buy, and she's wanted to, in the last year or so or more, we started sometimes sewing them. So one time she said, let's make Cat in the Hat, and so we sewed. So we now have a kind of plush toy of the Cat in the Hat, and then recently it was the Knox and the Fox, and then we made a box. And the blue socks that we were playing. And and a lot of, like, with plasticine, also making all kinds of animals, animated animals. Oh, you froze. Oh, there you are. Making all kinds of animated animals and figurines with plasticine too. And what else? Oh, she really likes kind of putting on her music tracks. They're kind of kid songs that also have like stories involved, and so we can dance around for hours. All the family, when we're involved in these kind of stories that are part of the songs. Or sometimes, like, she drew something that was on the song, or she'll take a plush toy and have him sleep and it's part of the song. It's like, she has all of these stories that she's always thinking of and acting or drawing or creating in some way.
Yeah, that sounds like it sounds like she is like just steeped in story, and she's just finding all these different ways of expressing those. That's so wild. So through acting them out, through drawing, through sculpting.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's really fun. And she does a lot like wordplay a lot. So she's also like she's really humorous. So she likes to make us laugh, and she laughs herself about all kinds of things. But even when she was really, really young, I remember she wasn't even 6 months old. Like she was kind of like like dragging herself across the floor, like when they're not crawling yet.
Yeah.
And she knew that Marco got so freaked out if she picked up like something on the floor to stick it in her mouth because he was afraid she would choke. So he'd get like, he wouldn't get angry or anything. He'd just be like, oh, what do you have in your mouth? And so she was kind of moving along the floor, and then she looked at us with this sparkle in her eye and this cheeky grin, and like took her fingers and like started to act as if she was putting something in her mouth. But she didn't have anything in her fingers. Like we could see that there was nothing there, and she was just laughing at us. It was so funny. And then she quickly kind of like, I don't know, before she started talking a little bit before one, like words, and by 1.5 she was saying full sentences, and tons of word games and kind of jokes with that. So she gets such a kick out of it. Like if I say like, oh, would you like something to eat? No, nothing. And so I say, here's a plate with nothing. And she just cracks up. And then she'll be laughing about it for ages. And she remembers like old lines and brings them up for us to laugh about. It's so fun.
Oh my goodness. Yes, it sounds like I'm there.
So we have so much fun. And then I'd say Marco's one main thing that he loves is playing with her and with us. He just loves, like, I learned so much about kind of imaginary play from watching them play, because I guess, I don't know, I can sometimes, but I find a little bit more difficult, but I'm a lot better now, so I can spend several hours playing now too. But when she was tiny, like, I don't know, she was like 2, 1.5, and they would already start playing with the plush animals, and she wasn't answering much, but he was kind of keeping on the game, and she was totally immersed and putting her bits in, and they go into these wild games pretty much every day.
Could you talk a little bit about how you got better, for lack of with the imaginative play? Because I know that's something I had to learn when I was, I started staying home with my kids finally, and being able to participate some, like it is our own level. Like some of us are more comfortable with it than others, but I'd love to hear a little bit about how you got more comfortable with it.
Well, I guess like I was always very open to playing with her in every way that I could. So I would play, like tickles, or like fly like a bird, like on my feet, like she would fly, and I don't know, drawing things and reading, and all these things came easily, but the kind of interacting with little toys did not come so easily. And I think I mostly learned by watching him, and like the types of things that he would say, and the types of games that they would play, and then I would kind of play the same games. And also I found that at the moment when they started those role play games, I was really stressed because of a lot of things that were going on in our lives. And also kind of getting triggered from things in the past, I think. I don't know. But in the end, I talked to a therapist. I looked for one that was kind of unschooling friendly. And I talked about kind of like mindfulness and not having my mind wander, because as soon as we would start, I would, like 2 seconds later, my mind was like, oh, and I have to do this and I have to do that. And I don't know, even like inventing things almost like, oh, I have to wash the dishes right now, and go running off to wash the dishes, when of course the dishes could wait, but just kind of that urge to like get things done. So I still am, but kind of trying to think about those ideas of productivity and getting things done, and what my priorities are, and learning more about mindfulness, and trying to choose, like, to be in the moment. I guess I kind of a mix of all of those things, but a lot of watching them play. a lot of watching them play and trying to sometimes kind of being invited and sometimes being told to go away and accepting that really gracefully and with a smile and not being hurt, and then like being invited in again. Because that's another thing, like let's say I'd be washing the dishes or doing whatever else and they're playing, and then Emma will come running into the kitchen and like hand me a plush toy, and that's an invitation to play, but my hands are full of soap and maybe grease and like I don't know, I'm like busy. So sometimes I would just say, oh, I'll be there later. But then Marco was saying like, and he would also kind of, that was like 2-3 years ago, he would be busy doing something and then he was like, oh, I'll come later. And then he one night he just said, no, like we shouldn't do that. Like it's an invitation to play. It's like an honor. It's the most magical thing. Like I dropped everything today, and like every time she invited me to play, I just jumped right in. And so I guess the story was like, I have these things to do and like I'll play later, and like, you know, you play alone. I don't know, there's all these messages, I think, I don't know, in my cultural sphere of like kids should play alone and like adults need to get things done and kids need to understand that and learn. And then I was like, no, that sounds amazing. I'm gonna jump in too and accept every invitation I can. Like if there's something about to burn in the frying pan, then I'll ask her to wait a minute. But now it's just jump in as soon as I get invited.
I love that phrase, that way of looking at it, that invitation to play. And I think a lot of what you were talking about is also learning to value play, like,
yeah,
as in for ourselves. Like it's easy to value for your child, but you know, your child's playing and I should be productive and doing these things. And there's just so much messaging, right? That I need to get, you know, this other stuff done before I'm allowed to play. But realizing that invitation to play is that invitation to connect, is that that's where our relationship and our connection.
It's the most connecting moment, and the most, I guess in the end, like, I don't know if that's the right word, like fulfilling for me. Like maybe I have like all of these kind of barriers in my mind preventing me from enjoying that moment, but when I can kind of let go on that and really enjoy, then it's the deepest connection with her and the biggest joy. And one more thing I might add is that I don't know if you've read Playful Parenting by Lawrence Cohen.
I've heard of it. I have not read it yet.
Anyway, I read that and I loved it, and it's really, really nice, and he has all kinds of ideas about games, so I also got ideas from there. But also he's a play therapist, and so he kind of like talks about ways to help kids work through things through their play.
Yeah.
And so I really loved it, and I'm not saying that but I kind of latched onto it in the wrong way. Well, not in the wrong way, but just in the way that sometimes, like, if I would play with Emma, I would try and get her to work through things, or like I would try and be like, oh, let's play that we're going on the train to visit my mom, like, because that was a situation that was a bit difficult. And in a way it was helpful for her, but in another way it was like a barrier, because I wasn't always kind of following her lead and just kind of playing for the joy of it. But I was kind of like, I had this agenda in my mind. Yeah. And so she does not like agendas. She can sense them a mile away since she was tiny. And so then she would kind of like look at me like now and go and look for Marco to play with. So that was another piece that I had to drop. So I'm not saying that the author Lawrence Cohen suggests that that's the way you should play with your kids. That's totally on me, but I'm just saying that's one of the things that I did, and that wasn't good. So I stopped doing that.
but, I mean, it's a great and helpful thing to mention, because, you know, as we're bringing in new ideas and we're processing them and we're playing around with them, and you played with that, that might be helpful, right? And then you experienced and that's not working for Emma.
It wasn't working that great.
When Emma's choosing maybe to play and work through those certain situations, so it's on her agenda.
Yeah, if she brings it up, then that's perfect. Then exactly. I just try and go with the flow, and I don't know, just play. And the thing for me, it's important. I guess it's not everybody that's like that, but for me, it's important not to try and have an agenda or a plan, because that's a lot of what I constantly tend to do. So
yes. So and I found often when I'm doing that, when I'm trying to even subtly direct the play, is that I'm not noticing the way that they're subtly trying to direct the play. Like they may be trying to accomplish something, and I'm so busy trying to accomplish my thing that I'm not noticing where their head's at, basically.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So then they lose that opportunity.
Yeah.
But I mean, it all bubbles up. We're all learning and playing in those moments. But yeah, I'll put links in the show notes to that. And Bernie de Cohen, I think is his name, is a play guy that I had read his book and stuff. So we'll put those links in for people.
Okay. I haven't read that one, so I could read that one.
To enjoy. We didn't hit on your...
Oh yeah, I didn't talk about anybody else. Okay, so Marco loves lots of things. I think martial arts has kind of been a thread since he was young. and that's kind of, we met through capoeira. He kind of started the largest group here the first and the largest group here in Ecuador. Before that, when he was 14, he started taekwondo at school and was competing. And he also has done boxing and MMA and all of these things. And I also like, I would never want to compete, and I don't like the fighting aspects, but I do like the movement aspects. And it feels empowering to punch a bag. And so I've done kickboxing too, and boxing, and we did Muay Thai lessons too. And I did capoeira also for like 10 years.
Wow.
And so he's still part of several groups, and now in the pandemic has been training from home and also doing a few YouTube videos. I haven't really been active for a few years, active in any groups or any kind of classes or anything. But I still like to sometimes do some kind of kickboxing videos or stuff like that on my own. And so he likes physics, and he's an electric engineer. Like I believe you are. No, you in your past life. Anyway, he's an electric engineer, and he likes his profession. So he said, and I asked him what I should say his interests are, and I kind of listed like martial arts, and he's interested in history, and like kind of like the history of weapons and airplanes and all different things. And so I listed a whole bunch of things he was interested in. He said, yeah, but you're forgetting electric engineering. I was like, oh, okay. I'll mention that as an interest too. Sorry. Oops.
It's nice to be interested in the work that you do.
Yeah. And he loves, I think that the thing that he loves the most, apart from kind of our family life, is also talking to his sisters and mostly his sisters, I guess, like hanging out with them and talking with them, and brothers-in-laws, like family gatherings. They do karaoke, and we have a lot of fun. And then for me, also playing with Emma and our family life and chatting with Marco is kind of my favorite things. I've been interested in education for a very, very long time. So I work in education. I started teaching English when I was 16, and then all kinds of things related to education and learning and psychology and relationships and why the world is the way it is in terms of like social inequity and, like, where does racism come from, and, how does that happen, and how can we change it, and things like that. I'm interested in questions like that. I'm also, as I mentioned, kind of, I liked capoeira. I like, I don't know, like movement related to like dance or martial art, or I also love singing. So that also drew me to capoeira, because I could kind of do singing and instruments and kind of like dance and martial art movements. Yeah. And I also really enjoy doing things with my hands, like the things that Emma likes doing right now, like sewing and plasticine figures and drawing. I like that. And reading. I've always loved reading. Always, always, always loved reading many hours a day.
Oh, that's sweet. I love the way a good chunk of them weave together. Like,
yeah.
that's the thing, that we're adults now and we can't be interested in the same things. Like, I mean, if you were sewing or sculpting just for yourself, you would probably be doing different things. Yet, what a fun way to enjoy time together, right?
Yeah.
That, like you said, it's the doing things with your hands, whether you're sewing plushies and you're sculpting Doc McStuffins characters.
That's what we were doing.
Yeah, exactly. But it still helps satisfy that urge, right? That you can bring your joy to it even when you're making different things.
Yep. I enjoy it too.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And you mentioned your interest in education, and that's what we're going to deep dive into today, which I think will be really, really interesting. I'm excited to learn some more about it, but I think it'll be really interesting for people listening. So, to start with, let's start there. Let's start with growing up, because you went to an alternative Montessori free school growing up. So I thought we could start there, and maybe you could share a bit about that experience.
Okay. I think I'll start a little bit before that though, because it also ties into the story. So in terms of kind of like schooling or education, my parents, so my mom said I went to a kind of nursery school or something in England where I was born. And then when I was 4 or 5, we moved to Canada. And then, and my parents had already read this book about this school called Pestalozzi in Ecuador. And so it's the kind of Montessori freestyle school that you just mentioned. So the Pestalozzi was, anyway, based on different kind of progressive ideas about education, but mostly, I guess, free school is a good description for it. So they had read that book and they loved it, but that was Ecuador in South America, and they were in England and their family was in Canada. They were from Canada. So they went back to Canada and they started looking for kind of like alternative schools. And so we were in Ottawa. And my mom said that I went to, I think it was 5 different schools, but I don't remember all of them because they were kind of trying out these schools. I do remember one that my mom said they were supposed to be alternative, but the only thing that was alternative about it was that we had this kind of break where we all, and that I do remember, we went to this large gym and we were supposed to lie on a mat and they had us do like meditation or yoga for a few minutes. But I think that was the only thing that was alternative about it. The rest was regular curriculum and classroom work and things. And then they didn't like any of the options. And so they tried homeschooling for a few months or something. I don't remember that either. But they said it didn't work for them. They didn't like it. But I think they hadn't found unschooling. They were trying to somehow get curriculum in, but it was me and my sister 3 years younger and my sister 5 years younger, who was kind of a baby toddler. My mom had her hands really full. And so my dad said he would come back from work really stressed and angry and try and teach me stuff. And he said, that's the reason I'm kind of freaked out with math, but I don't remember that either. And then the school that I do remember was the last one right before we moved to Ecuador. And that's a kind of public school. Well, it was a Catholic school, but in Ontario, they're Catholic public schools. Anyway, so I remember going there, and I don't remember that much, but I do remember one thing that I really liked. The teacher had a kind of game where each week a student brought in a big jar of something. So I think I really liked it because there was candy in it a lot of times. And we were all supposed to guess like how many items there were in it. So like 214. And then at the end of the week, we'd count it all out and see how many there actually were. And the one who was closest to the guess, I think, got the contents of the jar or something like that. I remember things like that, snippets. But I do remember a lot of other things that I think kind of, or I don't know if I remember, but now I know that I learned a lot about competing and kind of peer pressure and prizes, and prizes and punishment for doing certain things. I remember in 2nd grade, right before coming, there was some kind of math lesson, but I remember so clearly because one of the children answered how he had resolved the math problem, but instead of doing the sum, he did the subtracting, or anyway, something like that. And the teacher was so proud of him and saying, like, look what he did, like he managed to solve it in this way, and that's genius, and you should all follow that. And then gave him a prize because that teacher had set up a thing where he would give you points or tokens or something, and at the end of the week you could buy something like a teddy bear or chocolate or something with those tokens. Yeah. And I remember being so jealous of that child and just like feeling like all this envy and like mean energy in me, like, why does he get the answer and why didn't I think of that? And I don't know, just a lot of kind of negative energy around learning.
Yeah.
So I remember all of these little snippets, and then kind of with all the things that I was reading, kind of looking back and thinking, okay, so that really kind of the way, I guess, the school I was in and also the surrounding culture, that really had a big influence in how, like, what I think of learning and how I was also interacting with peers once I got to that free school, and with my siblings too. I just look back and there was a lot of competing. Like, I always wanted to pick some game where I would try and win, and that did not bring me a lot of friends nor a lot of happiness. The thinking of books, there's a really good book by Alfie Kahn called Competition or something like that. And when I read that, I was, oh wow, that just brings up so many things and helps me understand so many things. But anyway, I have these amazing parents who a lot of people think are quite strange when they decided all of a sudden to move to South America, to Ecuador, with 3 children under 8 and 1 almost ready to be born. I think my mom was 7 or 8 months pregnant. I don't know, 7 months pregnant. And they decided to move in February all the way to Ecuador. They had never been to Ecuador, but they just decided that was enough with the Canadian traditional kind of school system. They needed something different. They were sick of the winter. I remember them saying that a lot. Like, putting on snowsuits for 3 girls and then they need the bathroom. So they actually moved to Ecuador. And that's why I grew up in Ecuador. And they moved specifically, mainly for the free school, for a different education for us, which is quite amazing.
Yeah. So they moved to that area in Ecuador, specifically near the school, so that you guys could go there, right?
Yeah.
Wow. And, I can understand wanting to escape winter, especially in February like that.
Yes. After when I went to Canada as an adult, I was like, okay, I understand this. February is not good.
Thank goodness my birthday's in February. That's the only thing they get to good.
I mean, February is great, but the winter can be harsh. Oh, man. So I remember they told us, we'd be going to this what they asked us, I think, I'm saying like, oh, it's this school, and and it has all of these things, and they have rabbits and llamas and dogs, and they have these amazing spaces and no winter. And I remember we were trying to learn Spanish and I knew un, dos, tres, elefante because of that song of the elephant, sobre una tela de una araña. I remember that's the only thing I knew about Spanish from that kid's song. And my parents didn't speak Spanish either. They think they took a month lesson. That was it. But my mom is French Canadian, so they both spoke French too. So I think that helped a little bit. Mm-hmm. And we did too. So anyway, so we arrived here, and the Pestalozzi school has no curriculum. It's closed now. There was no curriculum. There were no grades. There were no marks. There were no prizes. There were no things that you had to learn by a certain age. And it was a huge space. They had an amazing space that they had built. All, I'd say Waldorf style. They never mentioned Waldorf, but later when I read, it's like those ideas of like children need nature and things that are made of wood and like natural materials. So they had this, for their kindergarten area, they had this huge building set up with like miniature chairs with like size for children under 5, with made of wood, and tables and like doll houses, but all made of wood and like natural materials, and a little kitchen and like a music area and a book area, and this huge area with water and soap, like to play with water, and all these climbing structures, and even like a carpenter area with all these different tools that kids could use, even 2-year-olds, like a hammer and things like that. So just an amazing space. And then for older children, like kind of the same, but more like a functioning kitchen with a gas burner from like 6 and up, and knives, and like just a lot of trust in kids, and like a carpentry area, arts area, lots of outside things, and everything kind of with that kind of like towards natural materials, and also lots of Montessori material. So like for math and for reading. So there was like the math area with all these materials. And they organized all kinds of trips, like to a factory and to the pool, and they had all of these amazing things going on. So it was a really nice space, and lots of amazing things about the school.
So you enjoyed your time there?
Mostly. I had a really hard time making friends there, so that was hard for me. And there were some things that I didn't enjoy, and some things that made me think like, would I want Emma to go there? And there were certain things that I was not sure about that I agreed with. And at first, before kind of finding unschooling and reading about unschooling, I kind of thought the problem was that there weren't any kind of classes. There wasn't a lot of structure. So I remember like seeing the chemistry area and thinking like, I'd love to learn about chemistry. I have no idea where to start. So there were some kids that would go in there and do experiments, but I didn't know at all where to start. And so I was just like, I wish there was some kind of introduction or class or something that I could just join and somebody would guide me through the beginning steps. Or like, I don't know, my dad would say like, oh, but haven't you heard this? Like, don't you know this thing about physics or about whatever? And I was like, no, where would I even start learning about that? And when I wanted to go to university, there was it was difficult for me to do the entrance exams, and I had to take all these classes before, and I found the math so difficult. And I kind of thought that was because of the school, like the way that the school was set up, that I wasn't prepared. Mm-hmm. But then I realized there were so many other students who were failing these tests too and had gone to regular schools. And then, I did so well in university. I was the valedictorian. I got A's for every single class, and all the teachers loved me because I was so interested in my learning and so interested in, passionate about all these different classes. So kind of later, like at first I blamed the school and like, also I thought like not having friends and not fitting in socially, at least if it had been a classroom setting, I would have been part of the class. Like I would have been part of the lessons and the outings and whatever. But in that school, it was just, everybody was doing their own thing, and I wasn't necessarily part of any class. Anyway, so that's what I thought before reading all these things about unschooling. And then it changed everything for me. I just thought, no, that's not the things that like the reasons that I thought, like that kind of drew me to studying education at university and just trying to figure out like what would be an ideal school for me. And I didn't have Emma then, but like what would really work, because I thought like I didn't find the Vista that alternative school. There were lots of things that I thought didn't really work well, like kids not being able to read at age 14. And for me, that was like scandalous. But with no kind of background for saying like, well, who cares if they don't read at 14? Like, what's the problem with that? But it was just like all of these kind of society messages, but about like what was right and wrong with learning, but without really being able to process it. Or like, I don't know, getting teased by kids who are not at the school, like, oh, you don't know multiplication tables, you don't know this, that, but with no kind of guidance of how to think about that or work through it. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. So I guess so when I read things of unschooling, like, oh, but you could tell your kids they could answer this way or that way. Like I think, oh, that kind of guidance would have been nice. I guess the adults in my life didn't know what to do in those situations.
Well, that's going to be really interesting when we get to the unschooling piece, like, because it's totally understandable, like from the way you describe that experience and how you were experiencing that school. And, like you weren't having those kind of conversations with your parents or with people at the school when you hear those external messages, right? About multiplication, like all that external stuff that we hear because they're so predominant in society, right?
Yeah.
You get those messages and without being able to kind of process and talk to people about that. And the way you were the way you just were personally experiencing that school, as in, not, again, no conversations about helping you how to engage with the chemistry area, if that was interesting to you, stuff like that. So, it's really understandable how you came out of that experience feeling like that wasn't a helpful educational environment for you. Right. Yeah. So then you were, and I love the piece too about how you were noticing, when you were writing your entrance exams and that so many people were finding it challenging regardless of their background and where they're from, right? Yeah. So, but this was your moment to lean into those. And you, as you said, you leaned in well, you did very well at university. And so I imagine, so was it that experience growing up with that school that got you interested in education? Because that's what you started, and we'll go right into the next question, basically, is that you became very interested in studying education. And like you mentioned, your master's and teaching courses and your PhD. So I'd be curious to learn. You were trying to figure out what a good educational experience would be. So
I think so. I'm just thinking there's a few more pieces about the school, but I wasn't sure if I should mention them because I kind of thinking like ahead of when I kind of in the order of questions further along, there's a question kind of like how does it compare to unschooling or what's different from unschooling? So I'm kind of in my head, I'm in a muddle like, I know it's like for those pieces for that question.
Yeah, what did I was trying to, I thought maybe we could talk about like where your headspace was at the time, right? Because at the time you didn't know about unschooling. You hadn't heard about it.
I didn't know. Yeah. So a few more pieces like about the school and how I felt at the moment is that I felt also kind of frustrated because I wanted to take, for example, flute lessons or acting lessons or singing lessons, or I wanted to learn those things. And I guess maybe it was kind of my schoolish mind still from my Canadian experience that I wanted a class for those things. But also it was because I wanted to meet new people. Like I felt like that was kind of like a specific group of people, but I wanted to meet new people, other people, and go out into the world. And also, like I remember asking one of the teachers, like, "Oh, I really want to read music," and she kind of said, "Oh yeah, like this means this, this means this. Now go off and learn it on your own." I was like, "I need more than that." That wasn't enough. That wasn't enough. Like it gave me a clue, but it was like, okay, now what do I do? So I really wanted to go and learn all these things, but that was not accepted in that school. So there was a very big belief of non-directivity. I don't know, that's not even in English, but like not to direct children. So like not interfere. I think they never said not interfere, but that was the kind of feeling of it. So it was like, and that was another thing that was, looking back, I think, like something that was difficult for me. Like you were supposed to play with the kids, like the adults were there to facilitate, but there was a lot of like, I won't interfere. So it's like there wasn't a strong developing of relationships with us. It was more like a bit observing, like, oh, okay, so, oh, you need this thing? Okay, this is how it works. Or there was a lot of like boundaries. So we'll set these rules and make sure that nothing crazy happens. Like that was the role of the adults, like to make sure that nothing wrong happened, or to help if someone got hurt or whatever. But not a lot of developing strong relationships. And I think there was a lot of that thing of like not interfere. So like that you'd kind of get in the way of the kids learning, or like direct too much and interfere. So that was the thing, like they really didn't encourage parents and like actively ask them not to put them in any classes, not to get us in any classes, because then we would be getting directed instruction. Like if I went to like a music lesson, then I'd be told what to do, and I'd be given a like traditional education, and be like that's the word they use, directing. But so that was a no. And TV was a no, and screens were a no, and computers were no. So anything like technology was also frowned upon. That kind of rings a bell even now, like in parenting groups, like all the natural parenting groups. Like there's things that I agree with like attachment parenting, but then screens are just like this evil thing that are going to rot your brain. And so that was one of the main things that drew me to unschooling. But anyway, that's for later on. But that was another thing. So I guess I felt like the world was a little small. Like there was that school and the people in that school. And that was it. Like there was nothing else. Like you couldn't go to any other classes, or we didn't, like there was a few people I could meet in the neighborhood, but that was it. And there was no anything screen like, so no internet, no computers, no television, nothing. So I think those were two major things that didn't sit well. Didn't sit well. Yeah. Didn't sit well with me. So those were kind of two other things I was thinking, like, like for Emma, like, but would I want that for her? Like that seems kind of restrictive, or I don't know, like closing the world instead of opening it. Mm-hmm. And that message, like when you were talking about like what I was being told about like not knowing the multiplication tables, there was a lot of, and this kind of ties back to Rousseau, like his ideas about education, like that you should be stuck in nature and society is bad. They never talked about Rousseau as being part of their philosophy, but later when I read about Rousseau, I was like, wow, that sounds exactly like my school. Like nature is good, and children's innate inspiration is good, but society is corrupting. So we need to keep children away from that corrupting society. So there was a lot of messages like that, like, oh, you don't know your multiplication tables, but, those poor kids, like in school, they're sitting at these desks and, they're learning all these things by rote memory, but they're not really learning them. And so there was a lot of talk with the adults of like, poor these people from this corrupting society, and we're doing this wonderful thing. And also limitations like I don't know, from the adults at the school, but also from my family, like, that we would be great. So there were all these stories about these great people like Mozart, who, was wonderful without having gone to traditional school. So there was like this expectation that, like we'd be doing these great things, but there wasn't, I felt like these expectations, but no real support. Like, I want to learn music. Yes, these are the notes. Go learn on your own. That's the way I felt a lot of times. But other people from my school don't feel like that, but it was me.
Yeah, no, it is very unique to the person. It is very individual, the kinds of environments that are supportive and helpful.
So I think my kind of quest for the best education is also kind of silly in a way, because it's not like there'll be one education that's perfect for every single person. It's more like, what do different people need?
So how did you find it when you were in the university programs? And
right, so I went to university to study kind of like arts, multimedia animation, actually. So like drawing animated characters and then bringing them to life in kind of video format. But it was a liberal arts school, so they had us do all kinds of courses like economics and math and I don't know, biology. There was a range of things that we had to requirements that we had to meet to graduate. And so I was always kind of curious about education courses, because I had started to teach English as a second language. when I was 16.
Yeah.
First as a way of making money, and I was really scared to teach. And then I found it really interesting, like trying to think of all these games to make it more interesting for my students. But I didn't like, and then I started teaching in an institute, but then it was really regimented. So there was like this curriculum and they already wrote the tests for you and you had to have the students do the tests. So there wasn't a lot of creativity on my part. And I thought, oh, that's education. I don't want to do that. No way. So, but then I took a class at university and they were talking about all these different theories. So it's like reading about that bit of Rousseau. And then I was like, oh, that's exactly like my school. And so it's so exciting to me even now to read all of these different kind of education philosophies or views and try and understand them with the different schools I've been to, I guess. So kind of reading about all of those things. And so then I started getting really interested with those kind of courses, like not with the mechanics that I had been doing at work, or some of the classes were like, you teach this way, you evaluate this way, and that I didn't like. But I really liked learning about all these different education philosophies and also kind of like psychology and related to education, like motivation and things like that. And then I guess I kind of thought, so the BESTA didn't really work, I thought at the time, because there was no structure, there was no kind of help, or like the teachers weren't trying to motivate us like, oh, there's this chemistry thing, do you want to see this experiment? Like there was no like inviting. So then I got into all these bits at university where it was like, in all of the education theories and things I was reading about psychology, it was kind of like, oh, well, the school structure kind of works like this. Like there's these things you have to do, the whole coercion bit, with the grades and everything, but we don't like that. So we're going to kind of ignore it. And we're going to talk about all these wonderful ways that teachers can motivate students to learn and present these ideas in these cool ways and all that. So I really liked that for a long time. But it also didn't really seem to be working. Like it didn't seem to make sense in other ways, because, for example, we'd have all these cool ideas about like how to present something or how to engage students. But then there was these lessons on differentiated education, talking about all the ways that students are different, like all of their interests and their learning styles and the gender and their culture and maybe neurodiversity and all these things. And I was like, okay, so I'm going to have, 25 students that are completely different. So no matter how engaging I make the lesson, it's not going to work for all these
25
students.
different versions of it.
So now I need to do 25 different lessons. This is not working either. So that's kind of a takeaway from my undergrad, where I was just still confused. Like, the BESTA doesn't seem to be the answer, but this kind of traditional education, even made amazing sounding, doesn't seem to work either. So doesn't really work. And then for my master's and now PhD, I've been studying, I am still a student at OISE from the University of Toronto, and there the focus is on society, education and society. So it's a very different focus and also very interesting. So like, how does racism play out in schools and all these gender roles? And what happens, if students are in this school that doesn't reflect their culture at all? And what's the relationship between culture and school? And all of these different, a very different lens from what I did in my undergraduate, which was mostly like classroom focused, like plan a good lesson and things like that. Really different focus, and like reading historically, like how schools have been used for colonial purposes. So all of those kind of things.
Cool. Yeah, no, that is very, very interesting, because that bigger picture is so much a part of understanding how that system tries to fit in there, right? It does. It just gives you a bigger picture idea of that, and how much of it isn't really about the learning.
Right.
How much of
exactly. Exactly. That's my graduate education has just opened up my mind so much about the different purposes of schooling that have nothing to do with learning.
Yeah. No, that's
a nice way to sum it up.
All right, now we get to the super fun part. Let's pull all this together.
Yeah, let me try and see if I can pull it all together.
Yes, as in like, so all those were, it's fascinating. It's really fascinating to me, like what your experience was growing up with in that school and the things that you found, the pieces that you found challenging, and then how that inspired you, or, had you thinking that almost, I was going to say almost the opposite of it, but
Yeah.
no, just more structure would have been more helpful. And so now you're participating in that structure, you're questioning it, and then you're learning such interesting bits like that piece where, it is very logical that learning is in the context of each individual and their experiences and their styles and their, who they are and where they are in that moment is what you need to connect to. So there is this kind of air gap between, yes, make it personal, make it interesting, and kids love learning, and you have to do it in this classroom with 25 kids. Like, how do you bridge that gap? So that's super interesting. So how did you come across Unschooling Itself, and what are all those pieces that kind of lit up for you, that helped, that made you think, okay, now unschooling is hitting these particular pieces, and that's what I would like to do with my family. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what happened? I guess as soon as Emma was born, I started to change some of my thinking because of who she is and the things, and her very strong knowledge of her own needs and the things that she wanted, and not wanting to be, kind of directed or I don't know, like not wanting me to be leading her life, or like telling her like this is good and this is wrong. Like she really knows what she needs and what she likes, and so that's a big starting point for me of wanting to I don't know, to meet her and not to try and be in conflict with her all the time of like, no, actually this is good. So, this is the right thing. So now I'm going to try and persuade you that this is the right thing. And she's not having it. And so maybe it's not the right thing. Like what's going on? So a lot of learning and everything starts with her, and me trying to, do the best I can by her. So I started reading a whole bunch of parenting books and everything. And when I was also in a bunch of Facebook groups and trying to figure things out, because like the kind of people that seemed to match with me, like from what I was like attachment parenting, like people who were breastfeeding and co-sleeping, but then they're all like anti-screens and anti-anything plastic and like only wooden toys. And I was like, I'm not sure that I like that. But anyway, so trying to find kind of authors that resonated with me. And then in one of the groups, they mentioned podcasts, which I'd never explored before. And somebody mentioned, what is it? Sage Family, Rachel Rainbolt. Yeah. And so I scrolled through her episodes, and I saw Alfie Kahn, an interview with Alfie Kahn. And I had read Unconditional Parenting a bunch of times and started reading other books of his, and I loved it. So I listened to that interview. But then she had other episodes on unschooling. And at first I heard it, I thought, that's crazy. I don't like the sound of that. That can't work. That sounds too much like the things that I didn't like about my alternative school. But then there was an episode on technology, and there was an episode on math, like how people learn math. And it was so interesting. I was just so amazed, like, oh, wow, like the whole discussion on technology. I can't remember if I listened to that episode first or it was I found there's an article, Lucy, I can never pronounce her last name, Atkinread.
Yeah.
So she has an article about the 10 things that are worse for your child than an iPad or something like that. Yeah. And so one of my conflicts with Emma, starting very young, like when she was about, I don't know, 1.5 or 2, and Marco. So my fight with both of them was that screens were bad. So all my life, screens were horrible. Like, we didn't have them at home. They were going to rot your brain, and like your eyes were going to die, and your creativity was going to die. And, you know, you were exposed to consumerism and commercialism and sexism and, oh my God, all these horrible things. And Marcos had none of those views. And Emma loved watching all kinds of things, but especially I just remember the Snow White videos that she loved. She doesn't like princesses at all. She doesn't care for Snow White, but she loved the dwarfs. and she and Marco would watch Snow White and would sing the songs and would dance and would play with he found some little plastic figurines and would play out these amazing scenes. And she was not even two, but she was starting to she would make this voice for Grumpy that was so amazing. And like, she was just kind of playing with that, modulating her voice that she hadn't done before. So just seeing her, and they would draw Snow White, and they would, everything, and she would dress up, and it was just a world of joy and of learning. And I was missing out on all of it because I was like, it was just so funny to remember. But I get like, it's almost as if she was playing with a live snake or something. Like, the screen would go on, and my whole body, like, I'd start like sweating, and my heart would start racing. I was like, oh my God. So I'd be like trying to get Marco to like turn it off. Like, okay, but only 20 minutes. And like, we got to turn it off. And like, the Pediatric Association, blah, 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 says no screens before 2 and blah, blah. So I was traumatized by this thing. But I could see all of the joy that they were getting out of it. And also myself, I loved watching videos. And once I was away from independent on my own, I spent a lot of time watching videos and a lot of learning on computers and everything. So it was all clashing in my mind. So then when I read Lucy's article and I listened to, first it was Rachel episode on podcast, and then I found your podcast, and then all of these different resources on unschooling and screens, for lack of a better word, technology, whatever. Yeah. It just opened up such an amazing world. And it just made so much sense. And the article of Pam Sarushian on like the economics of restricting. And then I realized like, oh, wow. Yeah. Like all my life, like how it had affected me to have, technology restricted and food restricted and all these different things restricted, and how that made, or still makes me kind of be, I guess it's almost like a word of binge, like, oh, I'm not allowed, and I won't let myself do this bad thing. But if I do, then binge on, I don't know, a Netflix series, or binge on food, or binge on these things that are bad. And so it just makes so much sense. And so I started, doing all this reading and listening, and then trying to get my emotions to catch up with my intellect. Because intellectually I could understand all of the reasons, and it just made so much sense. But then emotionally, like, she'd be, first hour okay, second hour, and then like, oh, my heart is racing. She's been watching for 2 hours. I'm gonna die. Anyway.
No, you really need those experiences. Like, you can understand something intellectually, but then you need enough experiences and observations, and it isn't a switch. It really is a time thing before you can really come to trust and know it. Like, you feel it in your bones because, you're having that emotional, that anxious reaction and everything. So it takes time to work through it where you're not having that anymore. So that's why the idea,
it took me a long time,
in your bones works for me.
Yeah,
it is a physical thing, isn't it?
It is. It really is. Oh, and it took me so long, but we never, like, even when I was like feeling in this panic mode, I never ever said, like, I never said that's enough. Like, I never said there's only 1 hour. Like, we never said, and we never had any rules or prohibitions around it, but we did like try and hide the iPad and interest her in other things. Or if she'd already been at it for 2 hours, I'd take out like something that she really liked, like beans, like lots and lots of beans, like throw them around and toss them down a slide, and like just playing with like things like that. And so she'd often just kind of leave it there and come and play. And then since she was distracted, we'd kind of hide it. But then she started not working. Like she'd get angry that I was hiding it. And anyway, so there was a lot of kind of like I knew that the reasons made sense, but then I was like, but she's too young. Like all these things that these unschooling people are talking about are for, like, the examples are 7-year-olds or, you know, older kids, but Emma's just 2. And so it's not right. She's so young. Anyway, a lot of working through that. So there was a period when so when we really kind of said, okay, like we're just going to leave the iPad there. And then when we moved to Quito, we have this big TV right in the middle of her playing area. And that's the way it worked out with the spaces. So now like her space has this huge TV and then a big couch where she, you know, jumps on and lies on and has all her toys around it and the iPad and everything. So now it's just part of her, like it's one more toy. And now we're finally at a stage where it is one more toy, like for me and also for her, because there was this little period where when it was more available, like she did spend a bit more time at it, but it quickly became just one more thing. So some days she's interested, some days she's not, and it's just like any other toy or tool in her environment.
I imagine too, as you were working through it, she could, even though you weren't setting specific rules, she could probably
she can
feel your
sense
energy and
yeah,
the hiding and stuff like that. Like
even when we stopped the hiding and the stuff, it was still a while, I guess, where she was like, now what are they gonna do? Now how are they gonna react?
It's that time again. It takes time for all of us to work through those different pieces. So she basically, that was time for her to develop trust again.
Yeah.
In you that.
Yeah, and for me, I guess, like when she was kind of rewatching the same things and was watching for 2 hours or whatever, or 3 hours, or who cares how long, but not like all day. So I started to calm down. But then there was one time where I found this iPad game that I knew she would love because it had no like prizes or levels or winning. It's just like little animated animals, which she loves, and you have them do different things in their environment. And so it's like role play on screen. I found that a few months ago and I gave it to her and she just loved it. And that day spent the whole day on it and I was starting to get panicky again. And I was like, so I remembered one other article that I read from Happiness is Here, Sarah, I can't remember her last name, but she was writing just like the Minecraft experience with her children, that, you know, that they loved it for a few days and did nothing but and barely slept. And then the novelty was over. And she said, it's just like any other new thing. So I was thinking, yeah, it's like any other new thing. So Emma loves deep dives. Like she likes a book, she wants to read 100 times. That's what she does with all the things that she loves. And so she did this deep dive and learned every single thing about that game.
Well, you know, that's like we do that as adults. That's like kind of a human thing, right? That when we do something new and we're excited, we want to do it as much as possible until we kind of gain that experience. Right? I mean, we want to doing it. Like if
I know it's just all these cultural messages, like
yeah,
I do that all the time. It's just, I guess, all these cultural messages, like, oh, it should be an hour a day.
Yep.
Which just makes no sense. But anyway, letting go of that too.
So that technology is a big part of you know, from unschooling. You felt more. It made more sense to you versus the way you grew up. Like you put that in context when you started learning about unschooling and you started moving through. Because I imagine, like, as you're learning about it, you're putting that in the context of all your other experience, right? Your university and education experience and your experience learning growing up. So what were some of the other pieces?
Yeah. So some of the other things were, I guess, like related to the screen thing, just being open to the world instead of like trying to have like this protected environment where, you know, it was all wooden toys and whatever and all good, rather than just kind of being open to the world and open to whatever it is that she likes or she wants or she needs, rather than trying to have like these things that are good and these things that are bad. So I really like that about unschooling. where I don't feel that there's like, like nature is good and technology is bad, or like the whole food thing, like this types of food and these are good and these types of food are bad, or things like that. It's just so different, like just kind of I guess I won't try and summarize the unschooling view because everybody knows it or will learn about it in another place, but it was just so different from my experience growing up, and so refreshing, and felt so right to have these views about being open to the world and open to what children need and like and want to explore. There's also other bits, like I was telling you, in the alternative school there was math, not like taught in a sequence like in traditional schools, but there was like a specific area for math with specific Montessori materials for math. And like there was this thing of like, you're not doing math, why aren't you going up to, like you should be doing at least a little bit. Like there wasn't a specific thing, but there was a little push. And so what I really liked about all the things that I've listened to and learned about unschooling in relation to kind of math is just, it's really part of life. And so it's not like there's a specific area or there's specific materials or it's a different thing. So I just really like that view too, and just kind of thinking like, okay, that's a bit different from my alternative education. So there was like three different, so at first in my mind there were just two options, like what you were saying. It was like there was the alternative school where there was not really a lot of like engagement with adults or invitation or that many options, and then there was this structured thing where there were like invitations, but there was also a lot of coercion, like you have to do it, and the grading thing, and all these other bits. And so this third option just sounded so much better.
Yeah.
There's also just, I guess, the main thing that we talk about in the network, the relationships. And so what I was telling you about kind of the alternative school and the way that the adults were kind of interacting was mainly, as I said, like you set up the environment and then kids are supposed to play with kids, and you can interact with them a little bit, but be careful not to interfere. and so I see with Emma that she really, really seeks out adults and loves playing with adults rather than kids, for now at least. Mm-hmm. And I think I was the same, but that was frowned upon.
Yeah.
And just like the developing of a real relationship rather than the adult being like the provider of the environment.
There is such a huge difference between directing and supporting.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, it sounds like they were so uncomfortable with the idea of directing that they kind of stepped back from engaging and supporting. Like your music, I'd like to learn how to read music example is perfect. It's like, they gave you a little tiny taste of it and then left you off to go and do it on your own because they didn't want to direct you. But in that engagement, in that relationship, there's just so many clues as to, when it becomes a little bit more coercive, when we start coming at it with an agenda of our own.
Yeah, like when the adult starts kind of pushing.
Yeah. There's so much information and just joy that we can have through that connection and engagement of helping them learn it. And whether we have that knowledge that we can share with them, or whether it's something new for us and we're figuring it out together.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that whole, it is the value of a relationship in learning.
Yeah.
Is vast, isn't it?
That's what I've loved the most, I think, about your work, about what I've been reading and listening to and all the things. So yeah, it's been such a joy to really connect with Emma and other people in my life. And when going back to the beginning, when you asked me about like learning to play, that was actually another piece that I had to peel back, because it was like, oh, but I shouldn't be directing, I shouldn't be doing this. And sometimes I was even getting on at Marco, like, oh, but like you're directing her too much. And like, don't tell her this. And of course, that's not helping any relationships. But that was another layer to peel back of like, like I can connect with her without directing or being pushy or having my own agenda. So it's not like, either I step away or I have an agenda. There is another possibility.
And what I love in there is this piece, we talked earlier about that need to be perfect, to do everything right. And when we're playing, like you've said, Emma will not put up with you directing. She'll be like, no. And that's okay. That's not a bad thing.
No, I love that about her.
Yeah, and that is just us learning in the moment. It's not a bad thing that we thought about that next thing, because that's where we were. But if she says no, that's not a bad thing either. And we just go a different way.
Yeah.
Right? It's just so much of the dance, again, back to that relationship, right? That we're both, that she's free to add that to the conversation or to the play. And to direct it in the way she wants to go. And if we kind of it's that fear of misstepping that I think can sometimes hold us back. We don't want, which is exactly it. I don't want to direct it. I don't want to get in trouble for misdirecting it or anything like that. Yet when we're just in the moment playing, all that flows there, doesn't it? It's totally okay.
Yes, it's on my mind and it can just go away.
The other thing that I thought was really interesting that you mentioned, I wanted to get back to, was how the parents were encouraged not to let their kids do outside classes and stuff, right? And that is so fascinating because, like you said, that does close off the world versus opening it up. And yes, on one hand, I think it's that fear piece of that traditional schooling area. Like you can totally understand that. But with unschooling, if that's something, I mean, when people first come to unschooling, we do kind of encourage, don't jump to classes as the first, as so often we're in the mindset that the class is the right way to learn that. Like maybe they just want to dance around the living room. Maybe they just want to kick the ball around.
I love that piece too.
Don't have to go do formal training. But there's also, if that's what they'd enjoy, if that's what they'd navigate to, maybe they're tired of kicking around and they want to do it more. Maybe they want to do it with more kids. Maybe they want to have the game experience. There's so many reasons why that's also a cool thing. Just another choice on the whole platter, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's our relationships and our connection with them that mitigates that fear of direction. Like we don't have to all of a sudden adopt this authoritarian outlook from the classroom and bring it into our home, right?
Yeah.
We can talk to our kids. Like Michael left Scouts. It was at second or third year because he didn't like that more. Like we moved, he had a new troop. He didn't like how authoritarian and controlling that group was. Like that was a choice, but we were having conversations about it and he weighed what he got out of it and what he didn't like about it. And he decided, there's just not enough good there for me. But that also doesn't mean that he shouldn't have gone there in the first place. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think I love what you said about the conversations, because I think just kind of reading later on, it's like, okay, so maybe there is, I don't know, sexism in the thing that Emma decides to watch. So is the solution to turn it off and, shut it away and like, no, you're never watching that, or talk about it because she's probably going to encounter it again. So like back to those conversations about all of the different things that she might be interested. I think that's a better focus for me or I feel better about that.
Yeah. And there's just so much more learning there.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. The world is bigger. I love that. I love that vision, just that of opening up our world versus closing it down. It's always a clue to me when I'm feeling like I need to pull in and close off a piece of the world, that it's time for me to do some of that work, some of that emotional work.
Yeah. I guess like the last piece that I had written down, I don't know if we have time.
Sure.
Okay. The last thing that I'd written down, like on my notes, like trying to kind of think of kind of pulling the pieces together.
Yeah.
About the kind of the alternative school that I went to is the focus on that I've also heard a lot of talk about in unschooling resources that I've accessed about kind of rules versus principles or boundaries and consequences. I found that in a lot of the kind of natural parenting world that I kind of was initially attracted to because I said as the attachment parenting. But there's a lot of the talk of like the boundaries and the consequences and the natural consequences and like the validating, not the valid. Okay, I'll try and explain better. So just a second, let me try and gather my thoughts. Anyway, so I'll try and tie it to a story. So when we first arrived at the school, fresh from Canada, we visited the school in the afternoon when there were no kids there, but it was kind of the introduction of the place. And as I said, my parents had kind of sold the idea of the school being that there were animals there that we could see. So we were directed to the kindergarten area because my two sisters were younger and not allowed in the primary area. And it turns out the rabbits were only in the primary area, like the primary school. So I was so excited, and we all were, because that was one of the reasons we had come to the school, was to see these animals. And we were like, and we could see like right from the kindergarten area, the rabbits were right over there, like 20 feet away. So I was ready to go running. And then the principals of the school said like, no, you can't, like your sisters can't go into the primary area. That's the rule. And it was such a shock. I still feel like a shudder right now, because I was like, oh my God, like we came all the way from Canada. They're not going to let us see the rabbits. And I was used to kind of explaining or like trying to reason like what was behind the rule, like with my parents. So I was saying, but there's no other kids here right now. Like if you're afraid that other kids are going to see like that we're going to see the rabbits, it's 20 feet away. It's not even in the other building. Like I was trying to reason my way out of this. And they were like, no, that's the rule. That's what we do here. And that was the tone forevermore, because then my parents got into that. So they wouldn't listen anymore. Like if I talked, they were just like, nope, that's the rule. No, and that was earth shattering.
Wow.
That was quite amazing. So yeah, that bit.
Yes. No, that again, that closes everything down, doesn't it?
Yeah. Right? No more talk about the rules ever again.
Wow. Yeah, that is fascinating. I mean, yeah, when you think about that from the child's point of view, right? For you, like you're having conversations, like no more conversations about this. I don't even care to hear what you think about it.
Yeah.
I'm not open to, because a rule's a rule. And I know I darn well better not go back on a rule's a rule, or I'll
yeah, there was a lot of talk. And my mom even talked about it. Like she was like, oh yeah, so things are pretty chaotic. So we have to, we're gonna have these rules and we're gonna stick to them. And or else there's going to be consequences. And, like, this is what we're learning at the school. And for me, it was just like, horrible. And I guess the other piece that happened when we just arrived the first time was my sister was just 3 and wanted to get on the slide. And she was asking my dad to help her. And they were like, no. Kids, the whole fostering of independence thing, which is the other piece tied to this kind of philosophy, like the Montessori, is that kids should be really independent from early on, and that you should kind of help them be independent. But it's more framed in like kids want to be independent and we shouldn't get in their way. It's framed that way, but it didn't always work out that way, because my sister was screaming on the floor because they wouldn't help her on the slide. All of a sudden, because it was a change, like before they would have, but here these alternative people are telling them like, no, if she can't get on the slide herself, you shouldn't be helping her. And so then anyway, that
well, I mean, in that world, that makes sense. That's within their framework, right? Because we were talking earlier about that support piece, whether it's physical things or whether it's things that they're learning.
It was like minimal support, but like trying to help kids be able to do as much as they could early on. So it was like, in some ways it was nice. Like they had really tiny low sinks so that kids could wash their own hands without assistance. And a lot of kids love that. But then what if there's a kid that doesn't want help? Then it's no. So that's the bit that I still don't agree with.
So that's a piece of unschooling that
I like,
really
that feels good. Yeah. And then, like, you had also asked, I think, about kind of my education. There's a lot of, I think we already talked a lot about a lot of bits, but what I really liked about unschooling was the lack of coercion, because I had, as I said, in my graduate education, reading so much about like schools for the purposes of colonization or racism or oppression of different peoples, and coercion is tied into all of that. And I really like the discussions of unschooling as a tool for decolonization in some groups that I found, and kind of like Akila Richard, I think, mentions, like, how can you use oppression against children and then hope for liberation?
Mm-hmm.
She didn't say it like that, but that's the general idea. And I didn't remember to write down the quote, but just kind of oppression and coercion towards children and what that does as a larger society.
Yeah, I mean, and we talked about that last month too, within the eyes of consent, right?
Yes, I love that.
When you're coercing them and you're having these requirements, and then all of a sudden you want, you're not giving them those tools.
Yeah.
Right. But you're expecting them to, walk into the world as an adult. It's like, okay, this life is for kids and this life is for adults. So, kids don't have the power, right? They need to be controlled.
Yeah.
They need to be coerced into doing what's right and all that kind of stuff. But then all of a sudden, that's not how they're supposed to treat anybody else once they're an adult. But then
that's true.
Vacuum, right? But then how am I supposed to? All I know is the way you treated me.
Yeah.
So I'm going to turn around and those are the tools I know for treating other people, right? So it's yeah, no, we'll have links for all that in the show notes too. Zakia Ismail and Akila have been on the podcast. They both
I listened to those episodes and I love them.
I love that stuff too. That's great. Okay, did you have anything else on your list? I
guess one last thing. I just remembered you had an amazing episode with Holly Johnson, I believe her name is.
Mm-hmm.
And she was talking about leaving her son at a Montessori school and how hard that was for him. And that, I listened to that episode right when we were kind of trying to decide whether we should try and find some kind of kindergarten program for Emma, mostly because of all the work that we had to do, but also because of this idea that, she should be with other children, and all this push of like children need to go to kindergarten because of all these different things, while I was learning about unschooling. But I knew Emma would never want to stay anywhere without us unless she'd had a long time, like months, to develop a very strong relationship with an adult there. But all of these places were just saying like, no, you drop them off, and then if they cry, that's fine. That's just part of it. Most kids cry for like 2 weeks. That's fine. And I'm talking to my friends like that had also gone to this alternative school and have found these alternative kindergartens that they love because there's similar, or they're the same philosophy of this alternative school. So they're like, oh, it's wonderful. And, it's even our previous teacher, you remember so-and-so, and she's so kind. And they have all these songs and games and things, and my kids love it. And they're telling me all these things. And then I asked them, okay, but how was that at first? Like, how did it first happen that you dropped her off? And then what happened? Like, oh yeah, lots of crying, but it lasted, 2 weeks and then it was fine. And for me, that's just, I don't know how to express, I guess, just listening to Holly Johnson's episode, I was just thinking, yeah, that's what's going to happen with Emma. Like, that's not, it's just, it just resonated so much with me and helped me so much work through that piece of dropping kids off, and the whole adaptation period, I'm saying in quotation marks, of kids crying their eyes out, not all of them, but some of them, of not wanting to be there.
Yeah, no, that was an amazing story. And I'll put links there too, so that people can find that if they haven't heard that one already. Okay, so.
All right, done.
What is something fun that you guys have done recently that you don't think you would have done before finding unschooling? I just thought that would be a fun way to wrap things up.
Yeah. So one night, Emma had put on Duck McStuffins, and a few days before, she had found a little keyboard, like a wireless keyboard that we had, and she put it right in front of this big television. And well, before she was kind of playing around with typing on it, and she was saying that she was doing her thesis because she hears me a lot trying to finish this dissertation for the PhD. So anyway, she was working away on her thesis, but then she put it in front of that television and was watching Doc McStuffin. And she lay down on the sofa and she pretended to sleep. Like she was like, "Oh, I'm not gonna sleep." I was like, okay. And then she'd jump up like a firecracker, like right up off the sofa, run to the television and start typing furiously. And then she started telling me that she was trying to direct the story. So like it was going to rain and she was typing like, "Don't rain." And then she'd run back to the sofa and lie down and pretend to sleep again. It was so funny. And she would just kind of pretend to sleep. And it was really late, so I thought she might actually sleep. And she closed her eyes. And then she'd jump up again and go tearing off to the television and start typing furiously, like whatever part of the story she was changing in her mind. And she did that a whole bunch of times. And it was just so funny. And there's just so many stories like that, but I won't go into a million of them. But just all of the stories related to all of the joy that we've come across by accepting the horrible, terrible monsters that are screens.
Oh my goodness, that's hilarious. I can just picture it. I know. Sorry, going through her mind. I got to change that. Okay, that's lovely. Thank you for sharing that one. Oh, and thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me, Daniela. It's been so much fun.
I loved it. I've been following the podcast for so long. It was so exciting to finally come on too.
Well, thank you so much for digging up all those things in your past and trying to, piece some of that together as you came here. It's been so interesting for me. I really, really enjoyed it. Thank you. Now, before we go, is there a place where people can connect with you online?
Oh, I hadn't thought of that. Well, I'm happy if anybody has any specific questions for my email, I guess is the easiest. I can write it to you.
I'll put that
show
there
notes.
so that we can put that.
I'm on Facebook, but I don't check it much lately. And I don't really post things yet. I have Instagram, but I don't really post. I don't know. For now, I like sometimes posting things in the network where it feels like a kind of safer, smaller place with people that I'm getting to know. So I like that. I haven't really much been into posting things to the wider world yet.
No problem. It's not an expectation.
Maybe I'll want to, maybe I won't. But anyway, I'm happy to connect with anybody who has any questions. I've seen a lot of people very interested in alternative schools. So it's always interesting for me, the kind of view that people from outside have of it, and then the view that I have from inside, from having been in that kind of alternative school that is quite common, I think. Around the world is getting more common. Anyway.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Daniela. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
You too. Bye.